What if I showed you this console? Or maybe this one? Could you tell me what they played or rather how they're supposed to work? I know what you're thinking. What the hell are those things? Well, let's just say that they are the grandfathers of what we know consoles are today. I wanted to go all the way back to the first generation of consoles and see what consoles were released during that era. I'll work my way up to the current generation of consoles and show you which ones I thought were unusual. Even if there's a million consoles to go through, there has to be at least some unusual ones that were released that not a lot of people know about. And no, I won't be talking about the Virtual Boy, since everybody and their mother knows about this virtual console by now. Whoa, it's red and just displays a screen of 2D images in red. Also crazy. I absolutely hate this thing. Anytime I get flashbanged with a color red, my eyes start to burn so much. Anyways, today I'll be talking about the unusual consoles that you probably haven't heard of. Starting with the first generation, consoles were named and labeled differently. They don't have a brand name like the PlayStation or Switch. Consoles had labels to emphasize what each console was capable of doing. If you wanted to know if the home console needed a TV to display output, then you would search TV in its name. Also, I think it's funny how the consoles had the sports label without actually telling you what sports game it had. It makes me feel like I'm gambling the sport. I'm telling you, these things had unnecessary names to them, like this one: most exciting home video game TVG-201 parentheses TVG 201-4, or the Color Video Sports Center 4600. But we can't forget about the Electronic TV Game Center parentheses MT dash 1A. My bad. I just couldn't forget bringing that one up. It's important. Nintendo even had its first console released in this era too, called the Color TV Game 6. The majority of the games that these consoles had was literally only Pong or Pong multiplayer, with maybe another game. The Color TV Game Racing 112 had this big wheel on top of it. This thing had 112 combination of games. No, it didn't have 112 games. It was just a combination of it. Whatever that means. I mean, you can race with it, so I guess that's cool. Almost every country had their own version of a Pong console. Argentina decided to slap a TV instead of having it output to a display. Then we have the audio mixers. They were really trying to cook something up with these consoles. All these buttons just to play Pong. I guess Pong was really popular back in the 70s that everyone had to make their own versions of it. There were other games like tennis or hockey, but it was just a reskin of Pong. Nothing really special there. The amount of Pong consoles the first generation had was insane. Apparently only 963 of the consoles have been listed, and it's not even close to being completed, since so many versions and models exist. That's it for the first generation of consoles, since most of them had either a knob or just buttons. Now we have something interesting: the Gakken Compact Vision TV Boy. This console was released after the Nintendo Famicom and only in Japan. Apparently it had advanced features with a wide range of games that it could play. I have no idea how the hell they would play a game with a telephone handle and a turn knob. Frogger was one of the games that could be played, but like how? I get that Frogger is only going up, down, left, and right, but how in this thing? I'm guessing I have to turn the knob in the direction I want to go and then press the blue button. Anyways, the console sold poorly and only a few of them were ever released because the price for it was super expensive when you had other consoles for less. The first ever handheld console was unusual too. The Microvision is a 16 by 16 LCD screen that has a grid of touch controls and a paddle. This thing can play super simple games, and you could change the faceplates to change the overlays of it. Basically, it was one of those Game & Watch toys that you would get from McDonald's. These were fire when I was a kid. Eventually the handhelds didn't get any support for it, so they just ended up discontinuing the whole console together. Most of the handhelds in this era had images hovering over the screen instead of programming it, hence the comparison to the Game & Watches. When looking at the consoles for the third generation, I noticed this ugly sci-fi looking console. It's called the ViewMaster Interactive Vision. You need a VCR and videotapes for it to play. The system would add graphics to the videotapes, Gameplay consisted of video footage that allowed players to make choices and simple arcade games between segments. Disney games were the main attraction for this console. The controls are so weirdly designed, it looks like it would feel more like a fishing controller than a regular one with a few buttons and a joystick. Another system that played off videotapes was the Action Max. So you would need to attach a small sensor on the corner of the TV screen. Only one problem though. Another VCR was needed to use the system. 5 games were released for this console. Yeah, this thing was really ass. There was also no way of knowing if you won or lost. The only way you can tell when the game is over is when the tape runs out and the game suddenly stops. The 16-bit era is here, and what can we do to make the consoles more popular? That's right, the Sega Pico, also known as the Kids Computer Pico, was the most raw console I've ever seen. The Pico is an educational game console that Sega made and surprisingly sold well in Japan, but not in America though. It doesn't have a screen. Instead, it had a pad that allowed drawing or moving a character, so it needed to be connected to a monitor. Cartridges for this console were called Storyware. The games were educational, from spelling, coloring, matching, or counting. Sega also released their educational versions of Sonic the Hedgehog, being Sonic Game Word and Tails and the Music Maker. The Leapfrog had nothing on the Pico. This was the Leapfrog back then, but better. Who wouldn't want to count with Sonic or use FL Studio with Tails and make bangers? It later became this advanced Pico version called the Bina. Now let's talk about the worst console that ever came across the 4th generation. The Super Icon failed so badly when it was released that it lost the whole company called Funtech. Funtech had to destroy and stop all production of the Super Icon just to sell the scraps and tech to the US. It failed since it cost too much money, and consoles like the PlayStation, Nintendo 64 already existed, which had better graphics than the Super Icon. Also, it had only released in Taiwan and in China. As we get closer to the current gen consoles, Apple made a console called the Pippin. The Pippin was essentially a PC and a home console at the same time. It modified the Macintosh and marketed the console as a computer instead of a system that can play games. Just like the Wii U, where people were confused, thinking it was just an addition to the Wii and not a whole new console. Marketing for the Apple Pippin was so bad since it never came with a keyboard. It came with a controller called Applejack, mocking all the people who bought it. Of course, they had to make the price worth a kidney at $600. Thanks to Steve Jobs though, they canceled the project. While the Apple Pippin was destroying itself, Nintendo was trying to avoid China's ban on home game consoles. The ban that China had created a black market for video games, making people who wanted to enjoy gaming buy pirated cartridges or disc copies to play on an emulator. And you know how Nintendo wants all the money in the world, so they decided to create the iQ Player to combat piracy. iQ Player was only released in China. It was one of those console controller things like the SpongeBob controllers that you would plug into the TV. The console was originally going to be able to play NES, Super NES, and the Nintendo 64, but in the end it only played Nintendo 64 games. Lifespan for the iQ was pretty good, lasting for 13 years until it was discontinued. Another system that the Nintendo made was the Panasonic Cube. I know most of you have already seen this, but Nintendo partnered with Panasonic to create a hybrid version of the GameCube that contained a standard DVD player. This was exclusively released in Japan. It supported CDs, DVDs, and GameCube discs. But with its low sales, Panasonic decided to discontinue the Panasonic Cube. Why couldn't they rename it to GameCube Cube or GameCube? You know, instead of the CU in the cube, it would have the letter Q. I'm a genius. I feel like if there was some type of name change to it, it would have sold better. Similar to the Panasonic Q, Sony made another version of the PlayStation console that played PlayStation 1 and 2 games. The twist was that it was also a digital video recorder. Like any other console that adds extra things to the console, the PSX had poor sales later on because of its high cost. The console had plans to release outside Japan but was later cancelled due to the prices lowering and sales increasing again. At this point, different consoles aren't different from one another, they just add a gimmick to it. Finally, the last unusual console that I found in the 7th generation. The generations after this one didn't have any weird or out of place consoles, so here it is. The GameWave Family Entertainment System, or the GameWave for short. I don't know what's up with these companies trying to make a hybrid console. As you can tell, this was also a DVD player. The difference between the other hybrids was that this system was strictly a family-friendly game console. It partnered with damn VeggieTales. I guess the cool thing about it was the controllers. They acted like a normal TV remote. Games like trivia, puzzle, and card games were played. This was a really good idea if the family was all hanging out in the living room, just like playing Uno but using a controller to make the moves. Up to 6 people can play, making it the best family party console. Well, this was a fun trip going through all the generations, seeing all the different consoles that were ever released. Trust me, there are way more unusual consoles than the ones that I've listed. I wish some of these systems were released for the US. After the 7th generation, companies had a hard time starting their own consoles since we already have the 3 mainstream systems. Also, there's no need to make unusual consoles since most games are starting to be only a PC exclusive. I just want to say thank you everyone for subscribing. I'm at 87 subs as of making this video. I want to reach 100 and hopefully more in the future, so thank you. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you want more of these half-assed videos, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. See ya.